Grow your practice, grow your wealth, grow your impact. Find out how to spend less time in the dental chair and more time on the things you love.
Welcome back to the Dental Wealth Podcast. With me in the studio, as always, is the magnificent Eric Morin. And we have a special guest in the studio with us today. It's someone that, I think we met a few years back. And ultimately, you had a great story about how you were listening to the podcast and then ultimately got involved with Tower Leadership. And a lot has happened since. So from Brickyard Dental Group, I'd like to welcome Dr. Michael Barno.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I've been listening to this podcast for several years. I never thought I'd actually be on it, so that's kind of cool.
So the student becomes the guest.
So here's a question for you. So that we just jump right in, there's a lawnmower story and a podcast, and COVID. So share the lawnmower, COVID, and the Dental Wealth podcast. How did you come to find this podcast and what was going on at that time? And we'd love to kind of just start with that story because that's a good story.
Yeah. So I guess it was during, COVID shutdown time when my office had basically been shut down for, I think, about 6 weeks. And, I was kind of in this state of absolute terror. It's like, what's going to happen with my office? And a friend of mine here in Columbia talked to me about Tower Leadership, and he said, you guys had a podcast. And so I checked it out because I was at home. I wasn't doing a whole lot. And, I just started listening to like the first episode, then the second one. And next thing I knew, I was just blowing through stuff. And so I live out in the country. I've got about 5 acres of land, and, it takes a while to mow all that stuff on my zero turn. So I would just, for hours and hours and hours, listen to your podcast like over and over and over again. Just like I went through, I think, the entire first 100 or so episodes probably within a couple weeks. And I was just eating it up. I thought it was great. And, this was before I'd even reached out to you, Eric, or anybody. I think next I wound up getting one of your books, Financial Evolution, I think. And I read that. I was like, okay, this is really good. This guy, he knows what he's talking about. And the thing about the podcast was, it's like, you just seemed like you were way more focused on leadership. And that spoke to me more than probably any other consultant I'd ever worked with. So I think at that point is when I actually reached out to you guys.
Yeah. And I remember that conversation. I think I ended up sending you the Financial Evolution book, and then we had a conversation, and it all stemmed from the podcast. I think it's funny because we always tell people at the end of a podcast, it's always share the podcast. And the doctor in Columbia that, that shared it with you is probably listening, was like, oh, I know Dr. Barno could probably use this. Yeah. And I know there was like a particular thing that we were talking about that really helped your business. And it was in regards to marketing. So can you touch on that a little bit? I think Eric was preaching this in the marketplace.
So it was during that same period of time when everybody was shutting down. Everybody was like turtles retreating back into their shell. And it was kind of, it must have been from one of the podcasts, because I think it was before we actually met. And, Eric was talking about, hey, now is the time to really actually double down on the marketing, because everybody else is, locking up shop and no one is out there. Everybody's cutting their marketing dollars. It's like your marketing dollars are going to go further because you're going to be the only person out there marketing. And so that's what we did. And we ramped up our marketing when we were actually shut down. We focused specifically on emergency patients because we were still able to see those. And, our practice just started exploding. We were seeing patients from other dentists in the area who just refused to see them during COVID, which I thought was a little ridiculous. The state dental board asked us to do what we can to keep dental patients out of the ER. So I felt an obligation to do that. So we marketed it, and we just started growing very quickly.
That's a great story. When we first talked and we had that conversation, it was, a lot of times Eric and I will do these podcasts, and we know there's listeners because there's people that call in and say, I've been listening to Dental Wealth podcasts about this, but we don't really know how many people are going to go implement that material. So you were like one of the perfect case studies for us early on. We were like, yes, someone got this message and took it and ran with it.
when we go back to certain times, like we can all go back to 2008 and go, man, we should have bought some real estate. And we can go back to these times because we know when emotions take over, we make decisions that are emotional. But logically, if we actually go back down to look at some of these decisions, like that advice, hey, look, it was taking 26 touches before COVID to get a hold of someone's attention. And then during COVID, it was taking one. So it was like, now's the time, everything's on sale. And there's times when we can look at and start saying there's sales on certain things and we reduce the cost. So the investment in that at that time, I was like, this is the greatest thing. So when we first met and you shared that story, I was so excited because I was like, yes, I was like, because you never know who's listening out there in cyber world. And so seeing you implement, and I'm glad you touched on the leadership too, because that was such a important thing, and it's such an important thing for us, and the ability. We were just talking, I think Matthew and I, a week or two ago on a podcast, and I was with a very large group, and they were saying, and now they're realizing the importance of leadership, because even when we get into the high scales of valuation, it's really, they're looking more and more at leadership. They're looking more and more on how you're maintaining your team and how you're taking care of people and what kind of leadership's within inside the business from even a value standpoint. So now that wasn't coming from a value, that was not the point of it. The point is intrinsically we should be great leaders and stewards of capital. But I love that you heard that as well. And it says we align from a paradigm standpoint. So you put that stuff in place, and then because we saw this, by the way, now people are going, man, the people that marketed during COVID did really well. And now everybody looks back and says, well, gosh, those were the smart companies that did that. So what was the outcome long-term of that decision for your practice?
Well, I guess I got to give you a little history on the practice. I joined a practice that was very well established back in 2013 when I got out of the Army. But the practice had kind of reached maturity and wasn't growing very much. Bringing me in, we added the capacity to be able to grow again, but we very quickly outgrew our facility. So around the time, probably 2018, 2019, I started realizing, we were at this plateau and we're not going to grow anymore because we're physically maxed out in our building. We actually added on to the building in 2019, maybe. And we very quickly outgrew that addition. So when the COVID shutdown happened, I had already been thinking about, what's the next move for this practice? We're a 5-op practice. We're doing $2 million or something maxed out there. And I realized that, okay, we need to move to a new location. We weren't able to get new patients. We had a demand for new patient appointments, but we had nowhere to put them. So, it was the shutdown. It was talking with you guys, becoming a client, making a plan, and actually realizing that there was an opportunity for me to move forward while everybody else is stagnant and hiding. And I bought a very large building. We renovated it, turned it into an 11,000 square foot building. We turned it into a massive dental practice. And we have the ability now to grow this business, this organization out. I just can't imagine us maxing out this building. I mean, we can have like 25 ops in it if we wanted. But I was so close to not doing anything and just sitting back and letting COVID happen, waiting it out before making a move. But I mean, really, the timing was right, and you guys kind of helped push me out of the nest a little bit, and made all this happen. So it was last year. It was almost 1 year ago exactly. We moved into this new building. I added another doctor, and the practice just took off again. So I think first year we went from 2 million to about 3 million in a year once we got this new building. So it's been very good. So the growth has been good. All as a result of kind of some of that marketing we started, and the growth we started when everybody was shut down for COVID.
I'd like to talk about your leadership for a second, because I enjoy spending time with you because leadership matters to you and those principles matter. The last time we were together, you were talking about the fact that you were not having a difficult time finding great team members, and that you had actually a lot of people coming into the practice because of leadership. Would you mind touching on that for a moment and that thought process around leadership and attracting great, talented people?
Sure. And, a lot of dentists were in the type of, a lot of dentists out there, probably a lot of the people listening to this podcast are the type of dentists that I was in that smaller practice. And maybe you've got a staff of 10 people. A staff of 10 people, you don't probably have a hygiene team leader or a dental assistant team leader or an operations director. You kind of do all of the management yourself. And if you've got a small practice, that's manageable. And but to a certain point, you're going to grow, but then you're going to stop because you can't manage more than 10 people by yourself. So I think for me, when we started this push for growing, I realized that the first thing I needed to do was build out a leadership team. And we started by adding a director of operations. And then that's not true. We started by adding team leaders. We had a hygiene team leader, a front desk business office team leader, and a dental assistant team leader, and an associate team leader. And we did that for a while. And then we moved someone into a director of operations position who kind of oversees the operations of the business. But developing the individual team leaders has been just a great exercise in, I guess, my own leadership, our director of operations leadership, and just focusing on the development of those individuals as leaders in the organization, in the community, opposed to just being a good dental assistant or just being a good clinician. And I realized that those things, which are ignored in a lot of practices, are really some of the most important things that you can be spending time on, because those are the things that allow an organization to grow, and not just to grow in mass, but to grow in awesomeness. I mean, just the ability to grow an organization that's amazing is so rewarding. Because if this practice was growing really quickly and, I had toxic people in the office and no one was happy, morale was low, this would suck. This would really suck. I've got 22 employees all over mad all the time. I mean, it would be not a good place to be. But I mean, we just have a really great team, and that comes from, I think, the leadership down.
Yeah. No, I think, I get lots of phone calls that come into Tower Leadership, and they're always, they forget that component of, all right, so a lot of times, Eric has said this on the podcast before, people build it mid-flight. When you have the ability with a dental practice, you can see what it looks like. So if I have 10 team members now, I'm a $1.5 million practice. Okay. If I want to be a $3 million practice, probably going to be around 20 team members. It's pretty standard in that front. And people always forget that. And they just say, all right, so I just need to focus in on the numbers, instead of the leadership of the organization. How can I bring in the infrastructure, bring in top people, a front desk lead, a hygiene lead, an operations director, in order to make sure that we can scale this business out. Just like you said, a lot of people come to Tower Leadership and they call in, they're like, yeah, I got a terrible team and I can't do this because of this. And I'm like, well, we probably should get this under wraps first before we go get into, all right, you need to put this capital here. You need to buy this equipment. You need to do this for the operatory. So I love, that little component right there. I'm going to have like Reese snip it out and be like, all right, I need this. So follow-up calls, I can just send this to people. This is what you need to focus on first, is leadership within your organization.
It's a big deal. And people, most dentists coming out of dental school, we're trained to be analytical people. We're trained to be clinicians. That's where our focus, and that's where all of our success has always been. We always correlated our success in the business with our clinical skills. And that's only going to get you so far, and I do think those things are very, very important. But unless you're willing to develop yourself as a leader so that you can then develop the people, around you as leaders, unless you're willing to put in the time and the energy to do that, you're not going to, you're going to cap out, and that's fine if that's all you want. But, the small single doc practice doing, $1 million a year, they are getting gobbled up. And, I don't love big corporations moving in and taking over our space. And I think the problem is no one's willing to grow their own organization so that it can be competitive out there against those big organizations, which is one of the things that we've tried to do here.
I was going to ask, if there was one thing that kind of attributed to you. So, we have a lot of people that get to that point where they hit capacity in their organization, and ultimately they need the nudge, or they need something that motivates them to want to take the leap and buy another location or start another practice, transfer all the patients into an 11,000 square foot building. What was your motivation behind that? I think, a lot of times people are searching for that. We can't create visionaries, but there had to be something in regards to that when you were thinking about, all right, why do I want to expand this practice?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And I think it's an important question that people have to ask themselves when they're thinking about making any big decision is, why am I doing this? And I actually sat down and wrote out the whys of what I'm doing. And I had to reference that a couple of times when things got bumpy. And I was like, why am I doing it? But to me, I love the profession of dentistry. I mean, I think it's just a phenomenal profession. And I do, there's been a lot of changes since I graduated dental school 15 years ago. And I don't think all of those changes are for the best. I mean, some of them are fine, but when you have large corporations coming in and dictating care or dictating the way care is delivered, I think you lose a little bit of what makes dentistry special. And I realized that the only way for dentistry as a profession to survive in the way that I know it is for someone grow their own organization, make it something that can compete and stay competitive in that marketplace. And I was in a position where I wanted to do that. I wanted to grow the organizations that I could serve more people in our community the way that we serve them. I wanted to create jobs for people who want to work in this type of environment and don't want to work for the big corporations. And I was at a point where I had to shit or get off the pot. I mean, I was either going to have to stop taking new patients and watch my practice plateau and then dwindle, or take the leap and do something about it, which is what I decided to do. And it was scary. It still is at times. But you have to get comfortable with fear, and you have to be able to work through that. Because if you work through it and get to the other side, things can be really amazing. And we've done some really amazing things here.
I think that one of the reasons why we wanted you on the podcast is I think you're an amazing example of what can be done, and in often cases what should be done. And what I mean by that is, when we first started, the idea of tower leadership, this idea was in leadership. I was kind of giving feedback at the beginning of this company as I should call it dental something, but it really went back down to this concept of, yes, but if we don't have great leadership, if you don't have great leadership in the organization, you'll never build all the things. I can coach you on the numbers and the finance and the marketing and all those types of things, but if you don't have leadership, the great people will leave you. And Matthew and I were looking recently at the best clients we work with, and what I mean by best, I literally mean top line revenue, most successful. We were just correlating the success of those organizations with how good the people were, and how it was amazing how there's such a correlation between leadership and being humble, hungry, and smart, and being a great person, and building an organization, because you attract top talent. I truly believe that there is a gigantic place in the market in the future for the mid-market group. And what that means is the independent dentist who builds an organization that can compete, as you said, with the future of dentistry, that can train, that can attract top talent. But you have to build the organization around that so that you can then compete at a different level. Because it's interesting, because corporations are going to have capital behind them, but because of the way that they're beholden to limited partners in a private equity firm, or maybe at some point shareholders, then they have to cut certain things. They have to pull back on certain things. They can't do the same things. And I think a lot of what you're speaking to are things that, as an organization, that when you do well and you build them out well for the right reasons, the future's bright, right? I mean, you're building that type of an organization, right? You're not sitting here positioning yourself to say, and everyone's got their own wants, because I love that you wrote, why am I doing this? I thought that was pretty good. I think that's such a brilliant thing, but it goes back down to your why. And I mean, your why is not to sell off to some corporate conglomerate in 2 years. Your why is to build a great organization, right? I'd love for you to speak to that, because I think there's people that listen to this podcast, and some of them are saying, I want to sell. I just want to increase my valuation and sell. And that group's out there. But there's also a lot of people who don't want to sell, and they want to build an organization that's a legacy practice that stands the test of time, and that can compete heavily and you can, anyone listening, you can compete against corporate, and that's not a problem at all. But would you mind speaking to that a little bit more? Because there's plenty of people who on this podcast who want to hear that message, who need to hear that message about building an independent dental, say group, but I don't mean necessarily multiple locations, whether that is or isn't. But when I say group, I really mean a strong business platform.
Sure. Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of people out there who, maybe they're getting towards the end of the career, or maybe they're just at a point where they want an exit strategy and they're ready to get out. In the past, I think historically with dental practices in the old model where you just usually had a single doc, the exit strategy, it's sometimes even the retirement plan, is I'm going to sell this practice to a younger dentist, hand it off, I retire, etc. That's changed. I mean, you see that some. I mean, I don't see it nearly as much as I used to, but yeah, that's one way to go. And if you're at that point in your career where that's what you're looking to do, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. We all have to have an exit plan. But for me, I felt that, I'm not ready to do that. I'm 42. I don't have any great desires to retire at this age. I'd like to keep doing this. And in order to do dentistry or practice dentistry in an organization like this, I have to create it. And that was really a big part of what I want. I want to be 65 or 70 and still dabbling a little bit with mentoring younger associates. And I need an organization that will, allow me to do that. And that's what I've built. And that to me is more important. Yes, my valuation is going to go up quite a bit. And I think it's a lot more work than most people realize is putting in the work to build an organization, to build a company. But that's really valuable. And like you said, it creates a legacy practice. It's not some practice that's just going to, shrink and close up shop or sell to, a large organization. And maybe it will one day. But to me, that was just my impetus. My motivator was growing an organization because I felt like that was just more important than just increasing the value. You can do things quickly, increase the value of your practice. But I think long game, yeah, my practice is going to be very valuable one day.
Do you share with your team the vision of what you're building? Do you have those conversations often, or at least with your leadership of that comment that we're building a legacy practice, we're building something of importance, we're building something to take care of families that are part of it? Do you have those conversations with your team?
Regularly. Yeah. We talk about our mission and our purpose and why we're doing all of this on a daily basis. In our morning meetings, we talk about, hey, we are here to serve our community and we're here to do it in the way that we think it needs to be done. And I have several current team members who used to work for a large corporate chain. And, I call them my rescues. They're like, I've rescued them from the pound a little bit, but they,
I like it.
They all have seen that side and that way of how dentistry was done. And so they are also very passionate about it, preserving the type of independent dental practice that we have. And we talk about that a lot. And it's an important part of being on this team is you have to have that mentality that this is a type of practice that is competitive. It's not going to disappear, but it's worth preserving. And you got to work and fight for that a little bit. But yeah, it's a big part of what we talk about on a routine basis.
No, I think I love that statement. And, I was talking to Jordan because you guys just did your one-on-one session. And I was like, so what's Dr. Barno been up to? And he said that you were like super passionate and your team was really excited about you guys doing a lot of free dental work. And he said there was like a recent one that you did that like changed somebody's life. So I know, oftentimes just like you said, ultimately we grow the practice to increase the valuation, but we're doing it for more of a purpose. We're doing it so that we can, help mentor associates as they come in, be a figure in the community, give back to people. And I want you to kind of touch on that a little bit, like, some of the things you're doing for the community. That way people can, be a little bit inspired in a way.
Yeah, I'll tell you two stories. Several years ago, there was a woman in our church who she didn't have really any teeth. I think she had one tooth on the maxillary arch and maybe a couple mandibular teeth. She was very quiet. And she didn't have a lot of resources, and we knew this. And through our pastor, I approached her and said, hey, if you want to do something about this, I'd like to help you. And so, this woman we brought in, we wound up doing a complete denture on the top and a partial on the bottom. Yeah, it cost me some lab bills and some time, but the impact that it had on that woman's life is huge. Since that, when we did that, that woman has gone on to start two different ministries in our community, a homeless outreach ministry where she's down dealing with the homeless problem we have in Columbia, providing blankets, toothbrushes, clothing. I mean, for hundreds of homeless people. She also founded a prison ministry where she was going into churches and speaking, about her life and the redemption that's happened in her life to prisoners. And when I think about the small little investment of time and money that it took me to do that for her and compare that to the impact in the world and our community, golly, I got a heck of a lot of ROI off of that denture. And that woman has just gone on to do some amazing things. She's so verbal, and she talks, she speaks in front of people. And in the past, I mean, you could barely get her to have a conversation with you one-on-one. So it was beautiful watching that woman blossom into who she was supposed to be. And we love doing that kind of stuff. But, to be able to do that stuff, you have to have an organization that can afford to do that. And a lot of guys feel like, oh, I can't afford to take on these big cases and do them for free. Well, if you have an organization that you've grown and you've done well, I think not only can you do those things, I think you should do those things. So the other story I'll tell you is a woman who, similar situation, she is a recovered drug addict. And, we've all seen the pictures of the meth mouth stuff. I mean, she's got that going on. She's 38 years old. And, she has basically little black nubs. And any dentist listening to this podcast is going to know exactly what I'm talking about. But, as a result of this, she's socially handicapped. She's, to an extent, professionally handicapped. No one's going to hire someone with little black nubs for teeth for any type of job that requires dealing with the public or customers. And so she works, a job at Hobby Lobby, I think, where she doesn't have to interact with people a whole lot. But we brought her in and talked to her, and I took out all of her teeth. I put in 4 implants on her. We're going to do implant-supported overdentures. And, we put her in just the immediate upper denture. And to see her face and her parents' face when they saw her smile, they saw her her God-given smile for the first time in years. I mean, just the tears were flowing. I mean, it was just amazing. And that's the type of impact that I think makes me want to get up and come, do all this hard work is the ability to change someone's life like that. And yeah, we can do that for paying customers too, but just someone who didn't have the resources, that would, they would never be able to afford that. Yeah. Think about, it was a $30,000 case, but with that $30,000 of work that I gave her, she's going to potentially get a job that's going to generate a better job that's going to generate more income. She's going to have opportunities in the workforce that she never would have had before. And so her lifetime income potential just from having a smile is probably going to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so to me, even though that's not my money, it warms my heart to be able to do that for somebody. Just knowing how impactful it's going to be for her just 5 years from now, looking back on this. So she's mid-treatment right now. We've got her in her immediates. Her implants went in last Friday. I'm just super excited to share that story, hopefully to inspire some other people out there to do stuff like that for people who need it, because they're everywhere and they can't afford it. And you know what? It's good karma too, man.
Yeah.
I think that I'm so happy to have you on this podcast because we're so similar to the same ilk. I was thinking, for those people that are listening, there's 3 reasons to grow a practice. And I say 3 reasons. There's 3 main focuses. Is one on your income. I just want to grow it so I can make more money. Maybe that's to pay off debt. Maybe that's to be able to do things for family or those types of things. But I want more income. I want more valuation, which means as you were talking about, Dr. Barno, is we can do some things to pump up valuation, but that might be your main focus, not income. Maybe you have enough income, but you'd like to put the value, maybe because you're getting to that point in your career where you're thinking about selling. And then there's revenue, and revenue and income are different. And revenue, the reason why we grow revenue is so that we can hire director of operations. We can hire and scale. We can bring in other doctors. We can have scale to our organizations. But I was thinking about this when you were talking, because I was thinking, with that type of leadership that you just talked about and combine that with revenue, growing organizations, using revenue to grow organizations, bring in people, and then to lead them in that conversation that you just shared. And it wasn't even just the thing. I think a lot of doctors do that work. I was watching your face and the energy and the excitement, and like, you're like, yeah. And so that leadership is contagious, and the team sees it, and the patients see it, and people see it. And it's one of those things where I could just feel that emotion of like, this is why we do what we do, you know? And so if we build a bigger group, and I love it because so many times someone's listening to this podcast, they're thinking, how can I just get bigger? How can I grow? How can I have more money? And look, everyone's got their goals, and I'm not beating up anyone. I'm just saying this is such a cool conversation because it's about building. And I talk about the word even wealth sometimes. Like, well, wealth means a lot of different things. It doesn't necessarily just mean money in your bank account. It means a lot of things. It means the ability to impact other people. And so it's really cool to hear you talked about, and it's this principled leadership, building an organization around principled leadership. And then that story is ultimately evidence of the type of organization you're building. And it's those conversations, because those conversations get shared and shared and shared. And I just love it. It's exciting to hear that leadership. And as you build the organization, so everyone's listening, as Dr. Barno continues to build that organization, he's sharing a paradigm, and he's going to attract people into his organization that have the same paradigm. And so as the organization grows, as the revenues grow, yes, as a byproduct, does the value go up? Yes. Yes, as a byproduct, is there increased income? Yes. But that's not the main purpose. The main purpose is to grow a principled organization. And as a byproduct, income and valuation increase, but the main focus is building an organization of purpose that can compete at a higher level. And I say compete because that message needs to be out there in the marketplace. It's not just about hitting production numbers so some limited partner at some private equity company can get a paycheck. It's about what can we do with dentistry, and how powerful is this profession, and the ability to take principled leadership and grow an organization. It just has tremendous impact. And I just, hearing you share that story, I just had that thought. It's awesome to hear. And I hope a lot of people hear that message. It's really good.
Thanks. And it, like attracts like, and I can get a little worked up and passionate about stuff like that. And it infects the team, like you said. And I have attracted a group of individuals who really value that type of stuff. And to be honest, it was the team leaders who approached me and said, hey, when are we going to do another free case and change someone's life? I said, well, let's do it. And they actually found the patient and brought the patient to me. It wasn't, it was their idea, and they got that from some of the cases we've done before. I've just surrounded myself with just really amazing, good people. I mean, every person on this team is just, I couldn't ask for a better team. It's just amazing. When I go and hire people, when we were growing really quickly and people were like, we can't get hygienists. And I hired like 2 hygienists. We didn't even have to look that hard because we have a reputation in the community. It's just, like attracts like, man. If you're motivated and excited about what you do, people around you, you're just going to bring in people more like you naturally.
And that's a message we've been preaching. If you'll go, people that have been listening to podcasts for a long time have heard us say that. And people want to find out so quickly, and I've been saying this for years, what's a good recruiter if I want to find doctors? Or what's a good recruiter if I want to find hygienists? And so Matthew will, Matthew hears a lot of the front end conversations where someone says, and that's what he was talking about at the beginning of the podcast, which is, someone says, I just can't find good people. And my whole team they're a bunch of bums. And it's like, okay, well, hold on. We have to stop and just stop right there. It's you. And people don't want to hear that. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but you have to go back and work on your own leadership because you're not attracting those people. So when we say, hey, go lead people, take care of people, actually genuinely want to see them do well and watch what happens, you'll see that people talk to their friends and they go, this is an amazing place to work. The doctor loves, taking care of the team, and even the word team versus, employees and staff, and making sure that the team feels taken care of. And by doing that, people talk and you get to build. And you were talking about it. Even in this podcast, you talked about doctors who want to come, who leave the corporate world and want to be part of the beautiful part of dentistry, hygienists who want to come to organizations. Principal leadership grows organizations, and it has a compound effect, and that stuff's contagious. I know I get to wake up every day and look around at such amazing team members that I get to work with, and so you sharing your story of that is so important, because we can talk about it on this podcast and we can tell people this, but your words are power, and people can hear that testimony to say, like, this stuff works if you just focus on yourself. And it's the old Jim Rohn said, to have more, you just become more. The more we work on ourselves, the more we become better leaders, the more we grow ourselves, the more. And you're a reader, right? I mean, you read a few things.
Oh, yeah. I was going to bring that up. One of the first things you did is send me 3 books. One of which was, I believe, The Energy Bus. And, I realized when you talk about working on yourself first, is when I read The Energy Bus, I realized that I was the energy vampire. I could be. So I very quickly realized, when I'm grumpy and stuff, I gotta not let that come out. But yes, I am a reader. I love to read, and I think all leaders are readers. My dad was a really big reader growing up. My wife is a huge reader. We have this giant bookcase with a ladder on it in our house. I mean, thousands of books. But I've gotten so many great book recommendations from you and Jordan and stuff. But yes, I do love to read. I think I've tried to pass that on to my team. Right now, we're having a who can read the most books off of Dr. Barno's professional reading list competition. I've actually got the bookshelf is over here in the corner, and it's got all the stacks of all the good books. And I've got a list of them. And, it's interesting as my team begrudgingly reads a book. They're like, wow, this is really good. Like Simon Sinek, Start With Why.
Yeah.
One of the team leaders who read that, or one of the team members who read that, was like, wow, this is actually a really, really good book. This excites me. I was like, yeah, that's why I recommended it. You guys should try to read more books. They're great.
Now you know how we feel when we try to get clients to read books.
Well,
look, I get it. Some people just don't enjoy that. Get an audiobook, though. I mean, you can do that while you're mowing grass.
Well, it does go back to the old Jim Rohn, and I quote Jim Rohn here and there because I love Jim Rohn's teachings. But to have more, just become more. If you look at your practice and you say, well, why don't I have people coming in the door and wanting to flock in here? Why do I need I need more patients, or whatever it is? You'd be surprised if you focus on you, how many more patients come in and how many more people come in, because the more we can focus on ourselves and grow ourselves. And people don't want to hear that, right? It's easier to just point the finger at everybody else and say it's everybody else is the issue. That's really easy, but I think it's the hard one to take a look at ourselves and say, how can I become more? And I think you're such a great leader, and I am so blessed to get to work with you. It's when you do a podcast like this, we start off with this podcast, and when you start any podcast, by the way, there's 0 listeners, just so you know. So you start every week with like nobody listening, and then over the time it starts to be 100, and then 1,000, and then 2,000, and it starts to increase. But to know that this podcast brought in someone as special as you, and we get a chance to work with you, it's been such an honor for us. And I thank you for coming on this podcast, and I hope that people listening to this podcast really, listen to Dr. Barno's message, because this stuff is powerful. This is the really, really good stuff. As I was saying, I was talking to a, giant group, and they had realized that everything was about leadership, and they'd gotten to the point, and sometimes people wait too long to realize that leadership matters so much in creating a phenomenal business. And I love your conversation around leadership, and I'd love to see the impact in your business. And by the way, leadership also means knowing business principles and knowing when to market and being able to take, having courage and all these other things too. It's not just leading people. And so I think you're the epitome of that. And I'm so glad to have you on this podcast today.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say. It's an honor to be here. This is the first podcast I've ever done. I'm glad it's with you guys. And like I said earlier, you guys stand out in the marketplace. One of the things that attracted me to you guys is your emphasis on developing leadership and how that then impacts other things. Like you said, if you're just focusing on new patient numbers or revenue or profit, Yeah, you can do things to bump that stuff up, and there are consultants out there who just come in here, drop a system on you and say, "Hey, use this system and you'll be fine." That I've done that. That's not a great way to go. That doesn't provide long-term sustainability. But you guys do. You really do. And that's why I've really enjoyed working with you guys as well.
Thank you for joining us today. I think, Eric and I, we were super excited about having you on here just to kind of explain your situation. And back to the point that I made in the beginning, all of this impact that you've made really came from one person telling you about this podcast. So I think oftentimes when we always say, and it's, we try to have fun with it and say, go and share this with people, like send this version to somebody that might need this message to be heard in order to change somebody's life. And look at all the impact this did just from one person reaching out and saying, "Hey, Dr. Barno, you should listen to this podcast. I think you'll really like it." So when we say that, and the listeners, I'm pointing at you guys at this point, is go ahead, share it. One of the reasons why Eric and I do this every single week is so that we can go impact as many people as possible in a mass format. So I appreciate you coming on and kind of showing everybody, what it takes to grow a successful business, how leadership gets involved. I know Eric and I will probably afterwards be like, this is one of our favorite podcasts because of everything that we've talked about.
Before you close up the podcast, I love for Dr. Barno, if you could, if you don't mind giving a piece of advice, it can be about anything, just one thought, piece of advice to the listeners. If you had one piece of advice or just thought for them, what would be something that they should leave with? What's just a good piece of advice? I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but and you could probably share many things.
No.
Just one thing that they should know or should think about in their businesses.
I think pushing yourself out of your own comfort zone is a big deal. It's hard to do. We all get caught up in just our normal routines of work and home life stuff. And it's easy to get in this comfort zone. I'm doing okay. Why would I work any harder or push anything further when I'm doing just fine? Well, push yourself a little bit. That's not just, in business, that's, at the gym or in life in general. Push yourself out of your comfort zone. Take a risk. Take a risk with something. I think too many of us just fall into that trap in dentistry. I think we do.
You're a natural on the podcast, though, by the way. So you could have fooled us if this was your first go.
I love this profession. I think, I did not go to college to be a dentist. It kind of just, life worked that way. And, I can't imagine doing anything else really in my life. I just love the impact we have on people. I love growing an organization. I never thought I'd be in the role of a CEO of a company. Golly, it's very rewarding. It's a ton of work. It's a lot more work than I thought it'd be. But it's very rewarding. I wouldn't change a thing.
I think that's like the perfect closing remark. Push yourself, guys. Ultimately look at what you're doing, take the stairs, don't take the escalator. I think, little things like that, when you push yourself, and it's tough conversations to hear sometimes when you just kind of look at yourself and say, am I pushing myself to the best of my ability? So, biggest thing is always do that. And thank you, Dr. Barno, for joining us for this episode of the podcast. Thank you, Mr. Moore, as always. And we will see you guys next time. Remember, like, subscribe, share, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, guys. It was good talking with you.